Next is the superintendent's report. School funding finance update.
Well, if you've been reading the newspaper the last couple of weeks, you know that obviously school funding is getting interesting. Last Thursday, the state school board finalized, or at least made their first round of cuts in education funding for the 15-16 school year, which is the school year that we're in. It's one of the interesting things about school finance is that sometimes you get cut in the middle of the school year, which is, unusual, but for those of us that have been doing this for a while, we're kind of used to this. What the state board did, they approved changes in the budgets for what they call activity budgets. And those are programs within the State Department. That's stuff like health insurance is a line item in the budget. It includes ACE remediation money, Reading Sufficiency Act. There's some professional development money. There's stuff like Oklahoma Parents as Teachers. There are other programs. OETA is funded through the State Education Department. So there are multiple multiple programs that get money from the State Department of Education through their budget. The big item is state aid, and that's the one that gets the most attention. And we received somewhere in the neighborhood of I think a 1.5% cut in state aid. Brenda, is that it was going to be 2%, and then it got cut a little bit. And we just got an email this afternoon even clarifying even more what that cut was going to be. We have looked at all that, and for right now, we're projecting that our loss in state aid plus the loss of activity budget money is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $350,000, okay? Outside of state aid, the other big chunk of that money is health insurance. We have this unique situation where the state provides health insurance for teachers, but because they send that money to us and we actually pay the health insurance premium, if they cut that fund, we have to pick that cut up. So that's another $100,000 for us, okay? So that $350,000 includes $100,000 of health insurance money, $200,000 of state aid, and another $50,000 from some other assorted areas. The other cut that we received over Christmas break, and it's one that we did not anticipate, was we saw a reduction in state aid from our July allocation. So every July, we get an allocation of state aid based upon the highest of the past 2 years past the 2 of the previous 3 years weighted average daily membership in May. So they look at May 14, they look at May of 2015, whichever one's the highest, that's the one that they base our original state aid allocation on. We have school. We do what we call a first quarter statistical report. We run a weighted average daily membership report for the first 9 weeks of school. They go back in, they add all the different weights that students receive, and they calculate a new weighted average daily membership for the district. Each year in July, when the state gets its allocation of money, it holds back 2% of state aid to pay for growth across the state. Years ago, they didn't do that. And so what would happen is when the suburban schools grew, they actually had to go to the legislature at the beginning of the next session and ask for money to be allocated specifically to pay for student growth. So the legislature got tired of doing that, so they required this 2% holdout. So the 2% of state aid plus the final collection of all ad valorem dollars. when they figure our allocation each year, they use ad valorem collections from the previous year. So that money's always a little bit behind. They get the final numbers in July, and so when we do the midterm, they add the ad valorem growth from the previous year to the 2%, and then they redo everybody's state aid allocation. And typically what would happen is if you grew, you would get extra money. If you didn't grow, if you had more kids in May of 2015 than you had in October 2015, your state aid stayed the same. There were some years where even if your numbers didn't change, there was enough money that came in and we didn't grow that many students across the state that you got additional dollars whether you grew or not. This year, the amount of money set aside by the State Department and the amount of ad valorem growth statewide was not enough to pay for all the additional growth that happened in the state the first 9 weeks of school. And so as a result of that, there was not enough additional money coming into the formula when you combine it with the growth in students to maintain everybody's funding at what it was back in July. So the result of all that is that we received a reduction in our December allocation of $285,000. Now that's on top of the $350,000 that we got. We got a report from the State Department today, and the reason for that is we actually grew 4,000 students statewide in October. So that's pretty significant. I don't remember now what they told us the typical growth of kids is, but 4,000 is a lot of students to grow from the beginning of the school year to the end of the first 9 weeks. It's not that we've declined in enrollment. Our enrollment's been steady. We just didn't grow like other districts did. And so because we didn't grow, we didn't get any additional money. Those districts that grew, while they got more money on a per student basis, they didn't get as much money as they had in July. So we continue to lose funding in this state on a per student basis. I handed you out a chart last month which showed you that since 2009, our state aid, the money we receive from the state, has been cut 24% based upon the number of students we have in the state. So that 24% went up in December because, again, while there was more money in the formula, it wasn't enough to pay for all the student growth. And then the other thing that has happened to us, and we talked about this last month, we've had a change in the calculation or the distribution of motor vehicle funding. I can't remember when, but I'm going to say 1999, 2000. It may have been earlier, maybe a little bit later. We changed the way, or how we pay for our car tags. You may remember that there was a time when you saw lots of people in Oklahoma driving with tags from another state. And the reason for that is because the feeling was that our car tags were too expensive. People would go to Texas and get a car tag. And so the legislature came up with this plan, and that's when we went to the system we have today where you get every year your car tag is $85. So when they did that, what the legislature did is whatever amount of money that had gone into the motor vehicle distribution fund to school districts, the state guaranteed us we would receive that same amount of money. And they would base it on enrollment for that year. So from 2000 to this school year, the amount of auto tag money we've got has not been based on our current enrollment or our current average daily attendance. It's been based on our attendance from whatever year it was that this law was passed. Last session, a change was made in the distribution of motor vehicle money, and we were told that schools were going to be held harmless, that we would receive the same amount of money in the 2015-16 school year that we received in the 2014-15 school year. What they did not tell us, and we're not sure whether this was purposeful or it was just that we're writing legislation and we got busy and people forgot to do some things. So the pot of money that's being distributed to school districts across the state is the same pot of money that was distributed 14-15. That total dollars for all the state of Oklahoma. But what's changed is the distribution formula. And so the legislation that was written last year did not specifically say that they were to use the average daily attendance numbers for 1999-2000. And so what's happening is the tax commission has reverted back to the old law, and the distribution is being made on average daily attendance, but it's being made on last year's average daily attendance. And so when you do that, that drives it. It now takes those dollars and it distributes them the way that they were distributed for years. But what's happened is it's driving more money to the suburban growth school districts. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It probably more money should go where more kids are. That's kind of the way our funding system works. It just would have been helpful if they would have done that a year other than this year, or at least they would have let us know. They could have very easily have taken the average daily attendance for the 2014-15 school year. They could have run the numbers this summer. They could have told us, they could have projected for us how much money we would have received, and then we would have made budget decisions in the summer that we could have planned on this reduction. So far, that cost to us has been $200,000. And we don't know if that's all it's going to be or if we're going to continue to see a reduction every month for the rest of the school year, because they really have not told us anything. They're just sending us X number of dollars each month without an explanation. It's just because we've kind of figured out what's happened, and we've had individuals go to the tax commission to see. I know that there is a movement trying to get, there are some districts that are arguing that we're supposed to still be using the old formula. There's not been a resolution of that yet. So my guess is we're going to lose somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000, if not more, on auto tags.
So the Bixby's, the Wausas, the Edmonds got more money.
They got more money.
The growth.
In which they should have.
Yeah,
I mean, for X number of years, they didn't get the money they should have gotten because their numbers were based upon their enrollment 10 years ago. I'm supportive. I just wish we would have known. They could have done a 3-year phase-in or something. There's some things they could have done to mitigate this a little bit. So the bottom line is, when you take all those numbers and add them up, we estimate, and we don't know for sure because, again, we haven't received official notification from the State Department of Education yet. We anticipate that this year we're going to be cut $850,000. We are not sure whether that's all the cut that's coming. There's been some discussion out of the state that this is round one, that there will probably be other cuts as we go throughout the school year. I've just kind of sent an email to staff Friday telling them that, my estimate is is that when it's all said and done, we'll have $1 million less than we thought we had when we approved our budget last July. So that's the bad news, okay? Here's the good news. The good news is that even if we lose $1 million in revenue, we anticipate that we're going to end the year with an 8% fund balance. Now, the board it's kind of an unwritten rule, but the idea has always been, at least when I took this position in 2004, what was communicated to me was that the board at that time wanted to always have an 8% fund balance. And we've always been pretty close to that. We may have dipped back. We may have dipped a little bit below that during my tenure, but traditionally we've been above that. And sometimes when your fund balance is always 10%, 12%, 14%, you think that's where you always should stay. But 8% is a healthy fund balance. So we're not concerned about this school year. Okay, we know that we can do everything that we've planned on doing. You're going to start reading lots of things in the newspapers about schools that are laying off all their custodial staff, or they're not going to hire substitute teachers, or they're not going to do this or not going to do that. And we're not in that situation, so we won't be doing any of those things. We are being careful about hiring back when people leave. Do we really need to fill that position? We're having those conversations. Miss Arrett and I probably have those, it seems like, every day about whether we need to fill a position or not. And so far, I think I've told her yes on every one of them. I haven't held very firm yet. The issue, depending upon what the legislature does this session for the 16-17 school year, that's where some tough decisions may have to be made. I will tell you that my real concern, what keeps me up at night, is not 16-17, it's 17-18. Because if we were to have a 5% cut for next school year, if we thought that was going to rebound in the 17-18 school year and we'd be back where we were supposed to be in 17-18, then I might approach 16-17 a little bit differently. But we've seen a couple of things from the current leadership in Oklahoma City right now. And that is that they have not been quick to restore education funding. They still haven't restored the cuts that were made in 2008, 2009, 2010. That's why we're 24% less than we were when the recession hit. Because we still don't have the same amount of money on a per student basis that we had in 2009, 2010. So if they cut us this year, which they've done, and they cut us next year, I don't know how long it's going to be before they get us back to the funding level that we had at the beginning of this school year on a per student basis. And that's when you look at district dollars for school districts, you can look at lots of factors, but it really gets down to how much money do you receive per student. And if that money is flat or declining, then you have to make budget decisions to account for that. Because you have some expenditures that always increase. Your cost of personnel, we have a salary schedule. That salary schedule has in it raises for personnel each year. We have to be able to account for that. You know that your utility bills are traditionally going to change over time, and they're going to change up, not down. Now, we're very fortunate. The price of gasoline has dropped tremendously. So there's some budget savings there, okay? Natural gas is not as expensive as it was a couple of years ago. There's a little budget savings there. But at the end of the day, it is about students, the number of students you have, and how do you provide program for those kids. And And we've been able, in this district so far, we've been able to adjust our revenue. We've been able to make changes, and we haven't really, we've done some things we don't want to do. None of the administrative staff of this school district is happy that we have the large number of kids we have in elementary classrooms. But because we have large numbers of students in elementary classrooms, we've been able to maintain our budget and maintain programs for students. I don't know how much longer that can continue. We can't increase elementary class size anymore. I say we can't do it. I guess you can. I guess you can have, if there's not a limit, there's not a limit. But I don't think any of us want to see that happen. When we look at our secondary schools, right now, we have, if you think about 1017, and that's what we always talk about class sizes, the class size limit for secondary teachers, that's 7th grade through 12th grade, was 140 students a day, okay? And right now, that's one area when we look at our numbers, we have very few of our secondary staff that they're seeing those kind of student numbers. The average at the secondary level may be 120 kids a day instead of 140. So there's some room there to make some staff adjustments that would put more students in classes at the secondary level. Now, there's a reason why those classes are the number that are where they are. A lot of it has to do with when we get to especially the high school, we have lots of one-course offerings. Not everybody takes English, takes the same English, takes the same science, takes the same math, takes the same social studies. You have some students that need to be in biology too. You have some that are in physics. You have some that are in chemistry. You have some that are in environmental science. We try to offer a broad curriculum that allows students to explore the areas of their interest. We have some students who are in Algebra 2, some are in trigonometry, some are in mathematics of finance, some are in an Algebra 1 class that takes them 2 years to finish. Again, you try to have a wide range of offerings for those secondary students, but when you do that, it creates in some cases, it creates small classrooms with small number of kids, and that's good for kids. But it's something that as we start to look to the future and we start to think about what does Ponca City look like next year, the year after, and the year after that, there are some things there that we may have to make some real hard decisions on. I wish there were some other options, but 90% of our budget is in personnel cost, and so when you start talking about losing school dollars, and you start talking about burning through your fund balance, the only way to protect the fund balance and to make significant cuts to expenses is to look at personnel, because that's where your money is. Anybody have any questions? And as we go throughout the semester, we've already started meeting. We're drawing some plans up now. Obviously, we're looking at everything we can before we start talking about people. As we move forward, we'll present a plan to the board so you know exactly what we're looking at doing. What makes this so hard is we can spend a lot of time, and we will spend a lot of time thinking about cuts, thinking about budgets, thinking about reductions of programs, reductions of staff, reduction of services. But until we know what the legislature does, until we know exactly what they're going to cut, we really are just spinning our wheels. We could prepare for a 10% cut, and they could maybe not cut anything. They might come up with some plan where they don't have to cut anything. And so we really, we're in between this rock and a hard spot in that we don't want to overly alarm staff, because it may not happen the way we think it's going to happen. At the same time, we want people to be aware of what the situation is. So we'll try to, walk that balance as we talk to staff, and then again, as we get into January, February, I'll be out at the sites and we'll be explaining these things, having parent meetings and talking about the budget and those kinds of things. That's all I have. That's all my good news.
Any questions? Thank you, David. I think. Next item is the consent calendar. I need a motion for the approval of the consent calendar as printed.
Motion approved. Item 6.
I second it.
Call for vote.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye. Okay. 7.1, consideration of and vote to approve the following district financial reports. Reports here for A through M. Any questions or discussion? Call for a motion.
Yes, motion.
Thank you.
I second it.
Thank you. Call for the vote.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. 7.2, consideration of and vote to approve the following contracts agreements for the 2016-2017 school years. A is a contract between Schoolology Learning Management Systems, Schoolology Systems, and Ponca City Public Schools. It's an annual subscription for East and West Middle Schools at a cost of $10,600. B is a contract between Pearson Power School Premier Subscriptions and Ponca City Public Schools. Total cost of the agreement is $41,246.40. Contract C is a contract between Ardor Health Solutions and Ponca City Public Schools. They will provide a speech-language pathologist, Jodianne Abbott. Contract D is a contract between SHI and Ponca City Public Schools. Contract is for a subscription for Microsoft license and software for all the teachers and students in the Ponca City Public Schools. Total cost of contract is $49,560. Any discussion?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Like Dr. Pennington said, I mean, it's not going to be business as usual going forward on expenses. I mean, there's no question, but we've got 9 to 12 months head start getting ready for the 16th, 17th year. I would ask, and I don't have a problem approving these, but you almost have to look at everything we're going to spend money on now and relate it to a teacher. Add these together. Is this more important? Would you lay a teacher off and buy these instead? I mean, that's really the mindset we have to take going forward. And again, it's not business as usual, and I wouldn't think that we would buy every piece of software, every program that we've bought over the last year or two. I think everyone's got to be looked at in detail, how many teachers are using it, what's the value of each one, because you're comparing everything now against an educator. And I get off my soapbox now.
Well, I think it's a valid point that everything should be justified as we look at it. Always should be, but it's more important now with the situation we're facing. So, thank you, Robin. Do I have a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Call for the vote.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Thank you. 7.3, consideration of and vote to approve the change order number 3 for trout remodel and addition project. Cost of the change order is $1,632.40 to install a French drain in the elevator pit. Probably pretty self-evident.
Pretty important. Pretty important item.
Pretty important.
7.3, I make a motion to approve.
I second it.
Thank you. Call for the vote.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
7.4 is consideration of and vote to approve a proposed executive session for the following purposes: to discuss the possible termination, reassignment, resignation, and employment of personnel, to discuss the superintendent of schools contract, to discuss employment of superintendent, to discuss confidential conversations with the board's attorney, and to discuss the purchase or appraisal of real property, and to discuss negotiations. We do have, I'd like to have a
I'll
short.
move, we go to executive session
Second.
for the following.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye. You got your own candy. I mean, they've already kicked off.
It's already
Return
kicked
to
off.
open session. Okay, the minutes of the executive session were kept by the board minutes clerk and will remain confidential. Okay, consideration of and vote to approve annual ratification, renewal of contract for the superintendent of schools.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the superintendent's contract for 3 years.
I second it.
That's to add on the additional third year.
Yes.
We're allowed to contract for 3 years with superintendent. Any other discussion? Call for the vote.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Nay.
Okay. Item 7.8, vote to approve recommendations for termination, reassignment, resignation, and employment of personnel as published on page 68 and 69. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Call for the vote.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye. Any new business?
No new business.
No new business? Okay. Need a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Quick.
Mr. Newsom?
Aye.
Mr. Riley?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Dr. Kincaid?
Aye.